"Will, what are you doing home?" Angela, my wife of 28 years, asked. She had just stepped through the garage door and saw me sitting at our kitchen table, less than 10 feet away. Her body was partially blocking the tall younger man who was following her into our home. As always, Angela is beautiful. She is a striking 5'9" and a healthy 145 lbs. Her auburn hair is cut over her shoulders. She always dresses professionally for work. Today she's wearing a white blouse. I noticed that she had an extra button undone, and the cleavage between her spectacular 38D cup chest was mouth-watering. Her black linen skirt highlighted her world-class legs, and the 3-inch heels made the delicious cheeks of her butt fill out the back of the skirt to perfection. I briefly considered Angie's idiotic question and responded just as stupidly. "I live here?" The quick flash of irritation that had been increasingly prevalent over the last few weeks surfaced when she spit out, "Of course you live here. What I want to know is why you are home at 3:30 in the afternoon." I jokingly tell anyone who will listen that I had loved Angela since we first met. I had an appointment with 4 of the top people in her company, and Angela was their administrative assistant. She met me in the lobby and escorted me to the senior suite of offices for my meetings. 4 hours later, when she walked me back to the lobby, I took a chance and asked her out for dinner. The rest, as they say, is history. By now, Angie's gentleman friend had scooted around her and was standing at her side. I was half expecting him to smirk, but his very intelligent eyes were showing signs of concern. From the start, things weren't going as planned. I guess I could ask you the same question. "Auntie, what are you doing home an hour and a half early?" Angela and I have been joined at the hip since our first date. I worked hard and built a small but very successful insurance brokerage firm. With the help of her employer, Angela went to college and in 6 years earned a bachelor's degree. She moved from a support position and into human resources. Eventually, she headed HR in the company's Hartford, Connecticut office. I had loved Angela unconditionally for almost 3 decades. I willed myself to be calm. I wanted to break her just as effectively as she broke me when I discovered she was a lying, cheating fool. When I gave Angie my signature crooked grin, she responded, "We came home early to talk with you." "We?" I asked while looking Angie directly in the eye. His hand and confidently said, "Mr. Jackson. Will, I'm Michael Browner. I'm the new attorney at Kellerman & Sons, and I've been working closely with Ong for the last couple of months." While continuing to stare Angie down, I ignored his offered hand. I clenched in the primal instinct to jump up, wrap my hands around his worthless neck, and squeeze until his eyes popped from his skull. Instead, I growled, "I know exactly who and what you are." For the first time, I saw signs of concern in my wife, and then she cringed when I followed up with, "You threatened to cut the balls off the last person who called you Ang. Why are you putting up with such disrespect in your own home from this pile of crap?" I was pointing toward the loser. Angie looked worried and confused. By habit, she is a very careful planner. I was certain that she and loser had planned for every possible contingency for this talk. In her mind, every I was dotted and every T was crossed. I was already in her mind a compliant cuckold. A quick glance toward loser made me smile. I was fairly certain that his sphincter muscle was tightening and would soon be clenched in a knot, as tight as my sphincter. A crap show was coming, and it would be worlds different from anything that Angie and her boy toy could imagine. I took 2 or 3 deep cleansing breaths and tried to push the rage and disgust that had been growing into a quiet corner of my heart. "Let's get on with this," I thought to myself. It's time to throw them off stride again. "Why do not I make 3 drinks?" I offered. "We can talk in the living room." "A glass of wine, please," was Angie's subdued request. When I turned to loser, he seemed wary. He responded to my offer by saying, "Angela tells me that you enjoy bourbon and craft beer." I nodded and told him, "I do," as I got up from the kitchen table and headed to the bar in our family room. As I left the room, I heard immediate and urgent whispering as they moved in the opposite direction, through the kitchen to the living room. A few minutes later, through the kitchen to the living room, I met them in the living room. They were seated together on the sofa. I handed Angie a glass of her favorite Merlot and Loser, a tulip glass full of amber ale. I took my 2 inches of bourbon and sat in the armchair across from them. After raising my glass in salute, I took a small sip of the burning liquid. After returning the toast, Loser took a sip of beer. He held the glass in front of him and seemed to study the color and carbonation. He commented, "This is one of the most complex amber ales I've ever had." "What is it?" "Pabst Blue Ribbon," I answered. Loser's eyes flared with anger, and Angie looked confused and offered, "You said that Pabst Blue Ribbon is worse than donkey urine and the crappiest beer ever made." She was halfway through her comment when she saw me laughing. She exploded, "You're such a butthole. We came home to have a calm talk with you, and you've been nothing but rude and condescending." I smiled and questioned, "I'm a butthole, rude and condescending? I guess we really need to start our talk. I'm sure that I'm about to learn how to have a polite, uplifting, and loving conversation from my ever-faithful wife." Angie cringed and wasn't able to meet my eyes. Loser took over and began, "Will, we've come here to discuss." I interrupted and said to him, "You had it right the first time." "Excuse me?" He looked confused, as losers like him often do. "When you first addressed me, you called me Mr. Jackson, before presumptuously calling me Will. I greatly prefer, in fact I insist, you call me Mr. Jackson." As his face started to turn red, I finished with a shrug and said, "Oh, sir?" Instead of letting Loser continue, I turned to Angie and heatedly asked, "What do you want to talk about?" When Loser looked like he was going to respond, I said, "I'm talking to my wife, butthole. Just sit there, drink your complex amber donkey pee, and shut the fudge up." Angie was livid and exploded. "Your behavior this afternoon has been disgusting. I want it to stop now." I nodded and seemed to think about her request. I asked, "Do you think my behavior is better or worse than your behavior over the last 5 or 6 weeks?" "What are you talking about?" Angie was half confused and half worried. Loser seemed to be holding his breath as he waited for my answer. I'll guess he was certain that their carefully crafted plan had gone off the tracks. Looking Angie dead in the eyes, I told her, "I do not know what pisses me off more, that you let him put his worthless little crotch up your dried-up old cunt, or that you treat me like an imbecile." The stunned look on Angela's face was priceless. Her eyes narrowed, and in a hushed voice, she asked the obvious, "You know? It seems like I have more friends at your office than you do. I received an anonymous email from someone at Kellerman's 2 weeks ago. The email warned that you were having an affair and had 3 attachments that showed you on a picnic lunch at Middlewoods Park. The pictures were complete with hand-holding and kissing. I'm sorry that you had to find out that way." Angela was trying to decide how to continue when I jumped in and asked, "So you want a divorce?" "No!" She slid to the edge of the couch, leaned forward, rested her elbows on her knees, and passionately said, "I love you and do not want a divorce. What Michael and I are having is a short-term fling. He's new to Connecticut and hasn't made many friends. Once he's settled, I'm sure he'll find a regular girlfriend. I'm sorry, but that doesn't work for me. I signed up for a monogamous relationship with a loving wife. Instead, I found out that the woman I've devoted my life is a fool and liquid dump. A divorce works much better for my future plans." Angela begged, "Will, just stop! I do not want a divorce, and I do not think you do either. This is a one-time fling and nothing more. I'm attracted to Michael, and I wanted a little extra excitement in my life. It's never happened before. It will be over soon and will never happen again. I promise." I took a small sip of my bourbon and sat quietly for a few moments before responding. "First, your promises have no meaning." Angela was about to erupt when I talked over her and said, "And second, why would I ever believe this is your first affair? For all I know, it's your 51st. Please, you need to stop and think. We've worked together to build our family, and now that Kelly is married and thinking about starting her own family, we can slow down and plan for a wonderful retirement in a few years. My fling with Michael will be long over and forgotten." I got up and, without asking if anyone wanted another drink, walked to the den and refilled my glass. I was confident that my poor manners were not lost on the 2 idiots in the living room. They were huddled together and whispering when I returned. "May I say a few things, Mr. Jackson?" Loser asked. "The floor is yours," I was my disgusted reply. "Your threat of divorce, while understandable in the heat of the moment, will prove unwise over the long term. You've invested decades together. Do not throw it away. Angela was initially worried that the prenuptial agreement her father had you both sign would cause her to lose many of her assets in a divorce if we were caught. I can assure you, as a lawyer, that a nearly 30-year-old agreement can easily be overturned. Laws change, legal wording becomes outdated. Any competent attorney will have the document laughed out of court. But even more important than that, you need ironclad proof of infidelity. Other than some mild, innocent public flirting that some of our associates may have seen. I'm confident you do not have the evidence necessary to enforce the agreement. I wondered as he finished his brilliant legal summation how my wife had become so stupid. Turning to Angela, I wondered, Texas Southern is ranked as one of the top 10 worst law schools in the country, year in and year out. How did you know? Loser didn't finish as I answered. One of my many mottos is know thy enemy. I continued as I turned my attention back to Angela. What's your plan moving forward? Angie. She took a few moments to think things through before she told me. Michael and I are going to spend the weekend together. I'll be staying at his apartment tonight, and in the morning we are leaving for New York City. We'll stay in the city tomorrow and Saturday night, and I'll be home on Sunday. Even though I knew their exact plans, the sheer audacity of my wife's statement tore my heart from my chest. I hoped she could see the crushing sadness in my eyes as I asked. So not only have you shared your body with this person, you're also going to share our quarterly getaway weekend with him? We've gone to New York City 4 times a year, every year since we've been married. Memories of all the spectacular sights we've seen together, the award-winning Broadway plays, the concerts, and sporting events. You have shattered all of the thousands of heartwarming memories. I do not know what's happened, Angie, but you have become as big a pile of crap as this person. I was obviously indicating loser. Angela could tell I was devastated and responded accordingly. I didn't hear a single word she said as the voices in my head were screaming, end it now. Looking over at a very concerned loser. I asked, is your wife okay with you being with my wife? We'll stop. Michael is a widower. His wife died several years ago. He would never cheat on his wife. Even loser had the decency to cringe at my wife's last statement. I smirked and said to Angela, unlike you. I continued immediately and asked, is that true? You're widowed? He quickly looked back and forth between Angie and me and hesitantly said, yes. I reached down and pulled a manila folder from the backpack sitting on the floor next to my chair. I opened the folder, scanned the first page, and read, Dr. Cynthia Browner, Emergency Department Surgeon. Ascension St. John's Hospital. Detroit, husband Michael, daughters Katie, 11, and Lacey, 9. Dr. Browner has resigned from her current position, effective June 22nd, and will be moving to the Hartford CT area to join her husband immediately after her children get out of school. She will be working in a similar position at St. Francis Hospital and Medical Center in Hartford. If I wasn't so unhappy about my marriage, I would have laughed hysterically at the look on Angela's face. You lied to me? She wanted to know. I couldn't help it. I did laugh. Can you imagine? I bellowed, a cheat and a liar. Lies to a cheat and a liar. What's this world coming to? Michael reached out and cupped Angela's hand. Just before I could shout, get your hands off my wife! I realized I just didn't care. Baby, I'm sorry. I wanted you and needed you and I lied so I could have you. He stood while still holding her hand. Let's go back to my place and talk. We'll go to New York tomorrow and have a great weekend. When we get back, we'll still have 3 weeks until my family arrives. At that point, you can be a full-time wife and I'll be a full-time husband and father. Angela considered her options for a few moments before standing. She took Loser's hand and turned toward me. After this weekend, I promise to give up Michael completely. I'll come home on Sunday, and I'll be the same loving wife I've always been. Angie and I stared at each other for a while. I wondered if she could hear my already crushed heart continuing to break. I've sat here somewhat politely while you both had the opportunity to tell me about your fling and how in the long term it won't affect my relationship with Angie. I'd like to ask that you both sit down and give me a similar 30 minutes of time to lay out the changes I see happening. They looked back and forth between each other and me, trying to silently decide what to do. I pushed the issue and said, The least you can do is give me 30 minutes of your time. Reluctantly, they sat. You've set up several Zoom meetings for us? I told them as I pointed the remote at the TV and pressed a few buttons. I'd become an expert at arranging Zoom online meetings during the COVID-19 pandemic. When the TV lit up, I said, "Peter, Lou, can you hear me?" I was talking to the two faces on the screen. "Well," Peter answered. I continued, "Angie, you obviously know our family attorney. Peter, I'd like to introduce you to his partner and my new divorce attorney, Lou Baird. Gentlemen, I'd like to also introduce you to corporate attorney extraordinaire, Michael Browner." Angie and Loser were stunned as I finished with, "Gentlemen, you have the floor." Lou immediately started, in a no-nonsense manner. "Mrs. Jackson, I am representing your husband in your upcoming divorce. Papers were filed with the court earlier this afternoon. I'd greatly appreciate it if you would retain an attorney and make arrangements to officially be served. I'll give you until the end of the day on Monday. If I haven't heard from your attorney, we will hire a process server. We have filed for divorce using infidelity as the cause. We have a private investigator's report that documents in great detail, using audio, visual, and telecommunication proof, your sexual affair with Mr. Browner." As Lou was finishing his last statement, I tossed a second manila folder onto the coffee table in front of Angie. The loud slap made both of them jump. "It's a copy of our divorce petition, including the PI report," I told the stunned couple, while Loser reached for the folder. Angie looked back to the screen. "We will be insisting that the prenuptial agreement is fully enforced. I know that you are aware that every 2 years, all of your family's business and personal legal matters are reviewed. As part of that review, the prenuptial agreement has been revised to stay within the current state legal guidelines. As we have your signed and notarized signature for every update over the last 28 years, I am 100% confident that the prenuptial agreement is fully enforceable. Per a vote last night by the Board of Directors of Jackson Brokerage, you are relieved of all corporate responsibilities and you are no longer associated with Mr. Jackson's firm in any way. You will have 7 days to return your card to the company. Your company credit cards have been paid off and canceled. Your cell phone will be canceled in 7 days. Your membership to Cedar Mountain Country Club and LA Fitness is canceled. We have also paid off and canceled the 3 joint credit cards you have shared with my client. We have frozen your joint savings, checking, and retirement funds. Per the prenuptial agreement, we expect an 80-20 split of the cash and near-cash assets in Mr. Jackson's favor. Mr. Jackson will retain your house free and clear. We have asked the court to expedite your eviction. As you have a home that you have been sharing on occasion with Mr. Browner, we will argue that it is easier for you to move. We are asking the court to give Mr. Jackson full possession of the property immediately and give you 30 days to remove your personal property from the house. There will be no alimony, and obviously child support isn't relevant. There are many smaller claims that my client has made. Your attorney can explain them to you. Will, have I missed anything? You've hit all the highlights. Lou, thanks. The TV screen immediately went to black. Just as quickly, Angie jumped to her feet and screamed. She looked at me and said, "Get him back. I have questions." I laughed and said, "That's not how it works. Angie, you'll need to hire your own lawyer to get your answers." "You loser," Angie growled. "I'm gonna screen destroy you." With a smirk, I looked at her partner in crime and asked, "Hey loser, what does your near-genius legal mind tell you is the over-under on this cunt destroying me in the divorce?" His silence had Angela sink back into the couch and curl in around herself. I'll guess my smile was ear to ear. I simply held up the TV remote and waved it at her before pointing it at the TV. As the second Zoom meeting started, I said, "Jake, can you hear me?" "Kyle, I've got a conference call that I need to jump on, so this will be quick." "Browner, you are fired. Effective immediately. Your personal items are being removed from your office and will be in a box in the lobby. If they aren't claimed within 24 hours, they will be thrown out. You will not be receiving a recommendation. Angela." I could hear her boss slow down and sigh. I looked over at Angie and saw her shaking. She was scared to death. I cannot tell you how disappointed I am. Your behavior as a senior member of my staff is inexcusable. That being said, 29 years of exemplary service must be taken into account. Your position in Hartford has been eliminated. I'm offering you the same position at our facility in Albany. You have a week to decide if you will take the transfer and 30 days to move to Albany. The screen went blank again as Angie cried into her hands, and Loser slouched back into the couch. I was purposely smirking at Loser. When he saw me, his rage started to build. He was younger, bigger, and I'll guess stronger. Unfortunately for him, he was as stupid as a bag of rocks. As Loser was ready to explode, I once again waved the remote, pointed it toward the TV, and pressed a button. The screen lit up and I asked, "Dr. Browner, can you hear me?" Loser and Angie sat in stunned silence. They were white as ghosts and their mouths were hanging open. The face of a beautiful blonde filled the screen. She said, "I've asked you to call me Cynthia." "Sorry, Cynthia. The floor is yours." "Michael, I filed for divorce. Expect to be served over the next few days. The kids and I will remain in Michigan. I've been able to keep my current position at the hospital." Loser begged, "Cynthia, please, we can work this out. It was just a fling." The face on the screen looked disgusted. "I've been doing some checking since Will contacted me. After I received the private investigator's report, I contacted him and asked him to do some additional digging." Everyone was staring intently at the screen when Cynthia continued. "Mrs. Jackson, do you know Alice Packer, Joy Likely, Tori Jones, Candy Phillips?" When Angie didn't answer, Cynthia laughed and said, "I really do not expect an answer. The question was rhetorical. I know they are all associates of yours. Did you know Michael had flings with each of them? Can you imagine? You were just one of his many whores. Tell me where to send your crap. Michael, you're not welcome at my house." When the screen faded to black again, Loser yelled, "I'm gonna kill you, butthole." He struggled to his feet as I slipped my Colt 45 from between the chair cushion and pointed the monster at him. Loser looked like he was going to vomit, which was exactly the look I wanted. "You've got two choices. Loser, you can leave or you can sit down and shut the fudge up. I do not care what you do, but if you come at me, I'm gonna shoot your left ball off." I'm not sure if I was completely happy that he sat back down, but was grateful that I'd be able to have my last planned Zoom meeting. I looked over at Angie. Angie? She was pale. Her cheeks were streaked with tears and mascara was smudged around her eyes. She looked awful. "I've been seeing a counselor for the last 2 weeks." Angie groaned and cried into her hands. "It's kind of funny. You cheat, lie, and share your life with this person, and I'm the one that needs a mental health expert." I laughed and said, "How screwed up is that?" A few moments later, I told Angela. After I told Dr. Waters our story, she asked me a question that's helped me a great deal. She asked, "Do you understand the old saying, love is blind?" When she asked the question, it was like a light going on in a dark room. "I loved you so much that I would have never known you were a cheating fool, if not for the anonymous email. My love was so strong that it overlooked your flaws. Heck, in my eyes you didn't have flaws. I hope you know, you'll never find anyone who will love you as much as I did." Angie continued to cry and rock back and forth on the couch. "I'm going to continue seeing Dr. Waters. I think it's important to have someone to trust with your innermost thoughts and feelings, especially after such a devastating event. I would have never imagined it was possible for someone I loved so much could humiliate and disrespect me to such a degree. But the good news is, I'll get over the hurt and humiliation just like I will get over you." I told Dr. Waters about my plan for today. She's not a big fan of revenge, but thought the first 3 Zoom meetings were okay. She did try to talk me out of our next Zoom meeting. She thought that the pain it would cause me might take me back a few steps in my personal recovery. I've thought about it and will admit that Dr. Wilson is probably right. The next Zoom meeting is going to do me more harm than good. But I do not care. This next meeting will hurt me, but it will cripple you. As I held up the remote for the 4th time and waved it at Angie, she shrunk back into the couch in a panic. I pointed it at the TV and pushed the button. All eyes were riveted to the screen, and when the face appeared, Angie groaned, "Oh no, please God, oh no. I love you, "Daddy," said my daughter Kelly, "I love you too, sweetheart." "Why?" Angie shrieked. "How could you possibly be this awful to me?" "I heard it all." "Mom, I've heard every word you and your partner have said over the last hour. I've heard what you've done and what you plan to do. You disgust me." "Sweetheart, please. This is a very complicated situation. You're too young to understand." It took Angela's breath away when Kelly responded. "Fudge you. I'm a 26-year-old, a happily married woman. Your situation isn't complicated. It's grotesque on one hand and pitiful on the other. I do not know what's changed, but you are selfish and totally self-absorbed." Angela was breathing deeply as she begged. "Kelly, baby, I've been so lonely since you moved away. It was like I was living in a fog. I missed you so much." Kelly's face on the screen looked perplexed. "So what you're saying, Mom, is that it's my fault you've become a liar, cheat, and fool, crushed dad, and are going to get divorced?" "No, that's not what I'm saying, and you know it. It doesn't matter. I think we all need a break from you." "Kelly," Angela shouted, "I'll come to Boston this weekend and we can talk. I'm so sorry this has happened. I need to be with my baby girl." "That's not gonna work, Mom, for 2 reasons. First, you'll be in New York, screwing your worthless, unemployed, newly divorced boyfriend." "I'm not going to New York," Angela insisted. "And second, Scott and I have planned a small private celebration for our closest family and friends. We've rented a venue closer to Cape Cod." "Baby? Oh baby, what are you celebrating?" "Since you aren't invited, I'll tell you. I'm 3 months pregnant and will be having a baby girl in February. Kellyanne, I'm your mother, and I insist that you invite me." "That's not gonna happen, Mom. I want my special party to be filled with love and happiness and not the lying, cheating, and disrespect that is consuming so much of your current life." "Goodbye, Mom." For the 4th time, the screen went blank as Angela sat and cried. I got to my feet and tucked my pistol into the back of my pants. "I'm going out for dinner and will be back in 2 hours." Looking at Angela, I said, "Please pack clothes and other essentials. You won't be allowed back into the house until the court responds to my divorce petition. I'm told that will take a week." Looking at Loser, I said, "You've seen what I am capable of doing. I'm giving you 3 days to move out of the state. If you are still here on Monday, I'll have you crippled in a much more literal sense." After pulling open the front door, I looked back at the utterly defeated cheaters and said, "Enjoy your weekend in New York. It's supposed to be beautiful both days." Now let's get into our second story for today. Story 2. On Friday night, just 3 days ago, I pulled into Toby's Bar and Grill at around 7:30 p.m. I was dead tired after spending the previous 2 days in the Big Apple, finalizing the negotiations with a large international bank. When the day had started, I was pessimistic that we would ever reach a deal, but it seemed that the outstanding obstacles started falling like dominoes shortly after our Friday meeting started. By noon, there were only 2 sticking points left. We decided to take a break and go out to lunch alone. I found a nearby Jewish deli and ordered a sinfully large pastrami and Swiss on rye and enjoyed every bite. When we reconvened at 1:30, George Willis, the lead negotiator from the bank, said, "We've made a ton of progress. I propose we split the difference on the last 2 points." George passed a paper across the conference table, and I read what he was proposing. It most definitely wasn't splitting the difference, but was easily within the bounds of what my partners and I would accept to win this large contract. I scratched my initials on the page, and George said that he'd email a formal contract to me on Monday. After shaking hands, we all went in different directions. I went back to my hotel, packed and checked out. I considered staying in the city for the night because my fiancée Trish was away for the weekend with her 2 older sisters. They were staying at one of Connecticut's giant Indian casinos. They planned to spend their days at the pool and spa, and their evenings in the finer bars and restaurants. Instead of another night away from home, I headed to Grand Central Station and caught the Metro North train to New Haven. By 7:30, I had driven up I-91 toward Hartford and exited the highway. I was heading through the always popular downtown West Hartford. I decided to stop for dinner. I was sitting in Toby's bar area when I spotted my two future sisters-in-law through the bar mirror sliding into a horseshoe-shaped table. Their husband slid in next to them. The immediate knot in my stomach and pain that seemed to spread over every inch of my body told me that my wedding plans, exactly 8 weeks away, were in trouble. My sisters-in-law should have been at the casino with Trish. After catching the bartender's eye, I said to Michael, "I need to go outside for a while. I promise I'll be back." "No problem. Chris, do you mind if I put your drink on the shelf and open up this spot?" Michael asked as he reached for my glass. I nodded in agreement and left Toby's. I sat in my car in the back of the parking lot, and I sketched out in my head what I needed to do. I called Trish, and she answered, "Hey love, how was the big city?" "It's the same as always. We finished up a successful negotiation, and I'm heading out for dinner. I wish you were with me." "You're so sweet. Chris, I miss you too. We've had a ball all day. We lounged at the pool and sipped drinks. I have a nice head start on my wedding tan. I'm meeting my sisters in a few minutes for dinner." Trish and I talked for a bit more before exchanging "I love you" and ending the call. I checked the Find My Phone app and punched in Trish's information. I'm not sure where Trish was, but her phone was in Falmouth. But, I thought, Trish's longtime neighbor and friend, Nick Flaherty, had a family home in Falmouth. We'd been invited there a number of times. Looking through my contact information, I found Sue Flaherty's cell phone number. I called, and after Sue answered, Chris Harrington. Act right, sincere surprise. How are the wedding plans coming along? Nick and I cannot wait to be there." I responded, to be honest, "I'm not sure how the plans are coming." Sue laughed and said, "That's a typical male response. What a question. Nick hardly ever has to travel over a weekend, but he is away this weekend." "What's this about?" Sue asked with a little concern in her voice. Before I answer, let me ask you, do you have a Find Your Phone Plush app on your phone? You let out an involuntary sob, and in a near whisper she said, "Not again." Honey, we're people. A minute later, she continued, "He's supposed to be in Philadelphia, but the tracker shows that he's at his family's cottage." But with a sad sigh, "I'm sorry, Sue. And Nick and Trish are together." Sue quietly cried for a number of minutes. This isn't the first time, she admitted. "Can I ask you a favor?" Sue? But when she didn't answer, I continued, "Trish isn't due home until Sunday afternoon." "It's the same with Nick." I asked, "Let's put off our confrontation until tomorrow night. In the meantime, I'm going to change the locks on my condominium door and take half the wedding money from a shared joint account. I'll be able to pack all our clothes and other personal items and put the bags in the driveway." "You're right, Chris. I'll do the same thing. Please text or call if you need someone to talk to. I'm sorry I had to call you." Sue was crying again, and between sobs said, "It's not your fault. Chris, my last call was to Billy Jones, a friend and neighbor." He answered, "What's up, Jafar? I need some help. Billy, are you around tomorrow morning? My only plans are to sleep until noon, but Sally will have me up at 7 o'clock. What can I do for you? Is there a chance that you can change the lock on my front door and the door coming in from the garage? And if you could change the code on the garage door opener, I'd appreciate it." There was a moment of silence before Billy said, "Loser, is the wedding off? Unless I'm missing something big, Trish and I are dead and buried. You got it. Into fur. I'll head to Lowe's first thing in the morning and have everything changed by late Moti morning. Does that work? You bet it does. You bet it does. Billy. Thanks. Feeling 20 years older, I trudged back into Toby's and walked to the bar. Actually, I was looking through the mirror at a reflection of my sisters-in-law and their husbands as Michael handed me back my bourbon. Their appetizers were being cleared by the server. I grabbed a bar stool and with my drink, I headed to my ex-future family's table. Michael called out, "Hey Chris, you cannot take the stool from the FEC." My furious stare cut Michael short. When I plopped the stool at the end of the table, climbed into the seat, and angrily looked back and forth between Julie and Karen. Karen, the atmosphere got chilly very quickly. "Chris, buddy, slide into the booth. We'll get you a menu," said Karen's husband. Steve, without taking my eyes off the women, I responded, "No thanks, Steve. I won't be staying long." I continued to silently glare at Julie and Karen until Julie's husband, Roy, asked, "What's going on, Chris? Ask your wife, Roy." Roy and Steve turned toward their wives. It was easy to see that both women were scared to death. "What's going on, Steve?" asked the sisters. Karen was the first to speak when she said, "It's not what you think, Chris." The thick tension grew as I looked across the table toward Karen. "I'm guessing it's exactly what I think I told the group." Steve and Roy were looking back and forth between their wives at one end of the table and me at the other. When tears started streaming down Karen's face, Steve demanded, "What's going on?" "Chris, your wives are covering for Trish. They were all together in my kitchen last Tuesday. Since I was going to be out of town until Sunday, they were going to Foxwoods Casino for a getaway weekend." "Where's Trish?" Roy asked the sisters. When they remained silent, he turned and looked at me. "She's at Nick's Cape Cod house." "Is that true?" Steve hissed. Both women were crying. At this point, Karen nodded her agreement. Julie blubbered, "Trish loves you, Chris." "She really does." Steve rolled his eyes, and Roy glared at the tabletop. "She has a great way of showing her love. She and her sisters lied to me, and she goes off with an old neighborhood crush for a fudge fest weekend. Just 8 weeks before she marries me. Your sister is a piece of crack." "Do not you dare," Roy interrupted his wife and said, "Shut the fudge up." Julie, turning to me, he asked, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to cancel the wedding." Both friends leaned back in the booth. Their wives cried even harder. "Dad has spent so much money on the wedding." And reception said, "Correct." "I do not care. I'm not going to marry a lying, cheating fool like Trish." I waited a few moments before I told the group, "I've told Sue Flaherty that Nick is cheating with Trish. We both would like 24 hours before we confront them." 4 sets of eyes were looking at me when I asked Roy and Steve, "I need your help. Can you make sure?" My head jerked toward their wives. "Can you make sure they do not contact Trish until 6:15 p.m. tomorrow night?" Both women started to protest before Steve said, "We sure can, buddy." And then turning to his wife, he said, "I'm disgusted with you. I have to wonder if your sisters have ever covered for you while you cheated on me." Karen was stunned as Steve continued, "If you or Julie contact Trish in any way, I'll consider filing for divorce." Roy's face was bright red in anger. His response brought a sad groan from Julie when he said, after the troubles we had at the start of our 3rd year together, I might file for divorce either way. But understand, I'll definitely file if you contact Trish. I shook both men's hands and left the restaurant. Saturday was busy. It took me several hours to remove the last evidence of Trish from our home. Instead of piling the filled garbage bags in the driveway, I rented a small storage unit, and my neighbor Billy loaned me his pickup. It only took 3 trips to get all of the bags off my property. The most difficult part of the day was writing an email to our wedding guests. I worked on the email in bits and pieces throughout the day. It read, subject, is Harrington and Clark wedding update. Dear friends, I'm currently halfway through a spectacular weekend, just 8 short weeks before my wedding day to Trish Clark. The weekend was spectacular because I discovered that Trish has spent her weekend in another man's bed. Trish and her longtime neighbor, Nick Flaherty, lied to me and Nick's wife, Sue. That's with the help of Trish's sisters, Karen and Julie, and their lies. The couple is spending this weekend together on Cape Cod. You might wonder why I think this awful behavior is spectacular. The reason is simple. I'm not married to Trish. It's much easier to cancel a wedding than to go through the agony of a divorce. This email is my official notice that I am canceling my wedding to Trish Clark. Sincerely, but Christopher Harrington. I called Sue Flaherty at 5:30 on Saturday afternoon. Together, we filled in each other on the tasks that we were able to complete. Because Sue was married, her separation from Nick would be much more difficult. She was able to talk with an attorney on Saturday morning and had an appointment scheduled for Monday morning. The attorney had recommended canceling joint credit cards and, as much as possible, separate the family finances. It was typical legal advice in the case of divorce. We finished our call a few minutes before 6 p.m., and we agreed to send our spouses a text at exactly 6 p.m. My text simply said, I hope you're enjoying your weekend with Nick. Thank you for showing me and the world that you are a liar, a cheat, and a fool. Our wedding is canceled. I sent the text at exactly 6 p.m. A moment later, I sent the email to our family and guests. 16 months later, I stood at the edge of the altar. My best man and groomsmen were flanking me to the left. The maid of our guests were locked onto the most beautiful bride ever. Her blonde hair was styled and looked beautiful under the small white veil. Her blue eyes sparkled and were filled with love, and her deep red lips gave me wicked thoughts of our upcoming wedding night. Uses the form-fitting white wedding dress highlight her heavenly figure without making her look slutty. It was perfect. As Mr. Clark and my bride started down the aisle toward me, I felt a pair of eyes drilling a hole through me. I scanned the guests on my side of the church before glancing to the bride's side. That's when I saw Trish. She had tears cascading down her cheek. I saw her silently say, "I'm sorry," before she turned toward her father and youngest sister walking toward me.